This is chapter number 4, Forest Society and Colonialism. What was the forest situation and forest society when colonies were there? First of all, if you see around, whether it is your home or whether you are at your school, you see that various things, many things comes from trees, forest. That is the paper of a book, copy, desk and tables, your doors and windows, the dyes that color your clothes, spices in your food, the cellophane wrapper of your toffee. In BDs, we have tendu leaf, gum, honey, coffee, tea, rubber, oil in the chocolates, which come from sal seeds, the tannin used to convert the skins and hides into the leather, herbs, roots that are used in various medicinal purpose. Forest also gives us bamboo, wood for fuel, grass, charcoal, packaging, fruits, flowers, animals, birds. So this list is never ending. We get everything mostly from the natural environment, that is the forest, the trees. If you just take Amazon forest, which is near Brazil in South America, then in a very small region you will find 500 different plant species in just one forest patch. 500 different plant species. So there is a biodiversity and diversity because of various species, various types of plants, animals, flora and fauna is there. This, but now, and especially in the colonial regime era, they continue to disappear. Between 1700 and 1995, when there was a period of industrialization, 13.9 million square kilometer of forest, or you can say around 9% of the world's total area, was cleared. That is, the forest cover was cleared just for industrial uses, for cultivation, for pastures and fuel wood. This is just a view of a forest in Chhattisgarh. So there are different type of trees, you can say small, bigger. So our main discussion started with the forest, what they are providing and why the deforestation started. So what is deforestation? The disappearance of forests. That is the cutting of the forest. It's not a recent problem. It was happening, but the pace, the rate was very different when we come to colonial rule. At that time, it was quite systematic, planned and extensive. So we'll start with the deforestation in India, and then we'll understand the deforestation at various other places also. In 1600, 1/6 of India's land mass was under cultivation. That is 1/6. Now the figure has gone up to half, that is around 50% of our land mass is used for cultivation. As population increase, when the population will increase, the demand for food and other resources will increase. So what peasants do, which were doing cultivation, they increase their boundary of the cultivated area. They were bound to clear forest and going into new land, means taking new land area. In colonial period, why this cultivation expanded so rapidly? This is a picture if you see Native Americans like the Lakota tribe who lived in the great North American plains, they have different diversified economy. They would cultivate maize, um, wild plants. They need to go for the meat to kill these bison. Now these big, very huge areas, the bison could feed themselves. They can move around, but most of the at the colonial time, these bisons were killed just because they were considered unuseful. Bisons is equivalent to buffalo, which we find in India. So what happened here is, why this area expanded of cultivation. First, the British directly, because the forest has various species, maybe useful, may not be useful, but British or the colony people, they wanted to produce the commercial crops like the jute, sugar, wheat, because there was a demand of this. The urban population was increasing and raw materials were required. So jute, sugar, wheat, cotton, and etc. Commercial crops were required. This was the first reason. The second, in the early 19th century, the colonial state just thought that forests are doing nothing. They are unproductive because you cannot cultivate there. The agriculture products cannot come from a forest. There will be no revenue, so there will be no income to the state. So what happened between 1880 to 1920, around, this is a range of 40 years, the cultivated area rose by 6.7 million hectares. And from where this land has come? From the forest. So deforestation actually took place. Mostly we see that if cultivation is higher in any country, in any region, we say that progress is going on. But the area which is cleared was immense at that time. We'll talk about what were the main reasons. One is the sleepers on the track. Let me tell you that what are sleepers? These are wooden planks laid across railway tracks. They hold the tracks in position. So if this is rail, this is generally made of iron, etc. Now the train has to go through it. There has to be something which needs to be, which keeps these rails, you can say, stick to the ground or hold them, and these are the wooden planks, and these wooden planks are nothing but these are the sleepers. By the early 19th century, the oak forest in England, they were disappearing. For that, timber supply for the Royal Navy was not there, means because the forests were disappearing. But the English ships need to be built. The imperial power of the British can only be protected by maintaining the ships, getting the ships. So by 1820s, certain search parties were sent to India just to explore the forest resources. And within 10 years' time, that is a decade, massive scale deforestation and cutting of this timber was done, and it was exported to UK, England from India. And at that time, in various colonies, there was a spread of railways. This was a great demand. Why? Because the trade of colonies or colonial people, also the imperial troops are moving. In order to run these locomotives, wood is needed as a fuel like charcoal or coal. And in order to lay these railway lines, as I just suggested, sleepers were very essential because they hold the tracks together. Just for a mile, that is, a mile is around 1.6 kilometer, around 1760 to 2000 sleepers for just mere 1 mile. This much of sleepers are required, and you can just anticipate that how many trees needs to be cut. From 1860, this railway network expanded rapidly because India is a big country. By 1890, 25,500 kilometers of track had been already laid, and in 1946 it went up to 7,65,000 kilometers. So as the railway tracks spread, of course, the sleepers are needed, and sleeper comes from what? From trees. So the trees needs to be cut. If you take an example of just Madras presidency in 1850s, early 1850s, annually means in 1 year, 35,000 trees are being cut just to make sleepers. And the government just would give contracts to individuals, and they would cut indiscriminately the trees. So wherever there are tracks, railway tracks, the nearby forest, they were just disappearing. If you see this picture, these are bamboo rafts being floated around the Kasalong river, Chittagong area this is showing. And these are elephants. Elephants were being used at that time to lift the plants, wooden planks, and these trees. And these are the different pictures of what was happening at one side and another side. That is, these are women. These are women returning home after collecting the fuel wood, because this is how they cook their food, and this is their daily need. And on the other side, the trees are being cut. These trees were cut, and they are pushed, and the trucks are used to take them from one place to another. So you can understand that they need these people, native people, they need these things, but they were being cut immensely. So these are truck carrying logs. Now one more thing was there, plantation. Because in Europe, there was a growing need of certain commodities like the tea, coffee, rubber. So the colonial government just took over the forest, and they gave the vast areas of this forest to European planters at very cheap rate. And these areas are properly enclosed, and they were cleared off of the forest, and now the tea and coffee are planted here. So these are the plantation of tea, coffee, rubber, etc. At that time, it was very, very, you can say, famous or required commodities. If you see this picture, and colonialism. So what we discussed earlier, in the colonial regime, various colonies, they want that the timber should be there, or the forest should provide stuff like wood and timber for building of ships and railways. Now the British were somewhat worried that the use of this forest by the local people or natives and cutting off trees by traders would destroy all the forest. So they called upon German expert Dietrich Brandis, and he was made the first Inspector General of Forests in India. Brandis, after certain observation, he realized that he need to put in a proper system, a proper management and planning has to be done, so that the forests are managed and the people also need to be trained. There need to be some rules and regulation needs to be framed, and felling of trees and grazing should be restricted, because they wanted, or British and Brandis wanted, the timber production for what? For railways and for other their usage. Anybody who is going to cut trees without permission will be, or without
legal bindings, they will be punished. So Brandeis set up Indian Forest Service in 1864, and also he helped in formulating the Indian Forest Act of 1865. And this is the FRI, Forest Research Institute right now, but it was Imperial Forest Research Institute, which was set up in Dehradun. Dehradun is now the capital of Uttarakhand in India in 1906. And the system they taught was called as scientific forestry. And what was the scientific forestry? This is the Deodar plantation in Kangra, and this is the, if I can show you, this is not from India, but still this is kind of scientific farming. Like, these timbers are in rows, they are planted in rows, and the previous forest is cut, means all the trees are cut, and now these timber, because they are useful for building ships and railways and other purposes, this is called the scientific forestry. So many of ecologists and other people, they don't feel that this scientific forestry is good at all. As I said, natural forest, where we have different types of trees, these are being cut, and in these places, in straight rows, trees are planted. This is called plantation. And forest officials, they surveyed the forest, estimated the area under different type of trees, and made working plans for the forest management. And they also planned how much of the plantation area need to be cut and to be replanted. After this Forest Act was enacted in 1865, there were amendment twice, 1878 and 1927. In 1878, there was a division of forest into categories like reserve, protected, and village forest. The best forest, they called it as reserved forest. So this is the best forest, and villages could not take anything. That is, those natives, local people cannot take anything from these reserve forests. But for house building and fuel, they can take wood from protected or village forest. So scientific forestry, we need to know a system of cutting trees controlled by the forest department, in which old trees are cut, means the forest is cut and new ones are planted, as you saw in the form of rows. Of course, if this is done, the lives of people will be affected. So foresters and villages, they have different ideas that how the forest should look like, because villagers they wanted different species, mixture of species, diversity they want, because they wanted fuel, fodder, and leaves from the forest. But the forest department, they just want things or trees or timbers for ships and railways. So they have different thinking about this. They needed some hardwood which are tall and straight. As you saw, I showed you the poplar trees in Italy, and they want particular species like teak and sal. These were promoted, and others were all cut. This is a picture of collection of mahua, Madhuca indica, from the forest, and this is drying of tendu leaves. Now tendu leaves are very important as far as the locals are concerned. They make their livelihood from this, they use it also. So in forest areas, people use forest products. As I said, these two pictures says it all: roots, leaves, fruits, and tubers for various things. Fruit and tubers they eat, and herbs for medicine they use. Wood for agriculture implements like yokes and plows. Bamboos make excellent fences, and they also use it to make baskets and umbrellas. Also, the dried scooped out gourd like Loki were used as a portable water bottle at that time. So everything was available from the forest, as we saw in the beginning of this discussion. So everything was there. Disposable plates can be made, ropes can be made. There are so many things. Oil for cooking, light lamps, they need oil, and this comes from the fruit of mahua tree. If you see, they are collecting mahua only. So the Forest Act meant severe hardship for villages. As we just saw that after this act, because the act was there now in place, all their everyday practices, that is cutting off wood and houses, making for usage of houses, and grazing their cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting and fishing, all became illegal because of this act. Now they were forced. What they will do? They are poor people. Would steal wood, and if they are caught stealing, they have to give bribes to the forest guards. And women also, they were worried, right? Because of course, uh, for police constables and forest guards, they can harass people by demanding free food from them. So this is bringing grain from the threshing grounds to the field. This is how they do. Both sides, women keep it on their heads. And the forest rules, because at that time it was enacted. Now how this is affecting the cultivation? If you see the European colonialism, main thing is shifting cultivation, or you can say Sweden agriculture. These cultivation agriculture were impacted, because this is the traditional agriculture practiced in many parts of Asia, of Africa, South America. They have various local names like lading in South East Asia, milpa in Central America, chitemene or tavi in Africa, and chena in Sri Lanka. If you talk about India, dhya, penda, bewar, newad, jhoom, podu, khandad, kumri, these are the local terms for the Sweden or you can say shifting cultivation. So what they do is, what is this shifting cultivation? They take a part of forest, burn it, and then when first monsoon rain comes, seeds are sown in the ashes, and the crops are harvested in October, November. And they do it when these plots, in few years, they lose their fertility, they leave it and go to another part of the forest, and they leave it. In 12 to 18 years, the forest will grow again. And the culture was to mix the crops, like in Central India and Africa, it would be millets, Brazil, Muniac, and Latin America, maize and beans. So combination of crops in cultivation with shifting was done. But European foresters, they thought that this is a harmful practice for forest. They felt that in this way, in few years, they could not grow trees for railway timber. When the forests are burned, then it is always a possibility that the flames would spread and the timber would burn. This is the Tongya cultivation. This is the system which local farmers were allowed to cultivate temporarily within a plantation. This is a Burmese photograph. And this is a picture of what we discussed just now, burning the forest, penda or podu plot. So they burn and then they use it for cultivation, and then just leave it and go to another place. And also shifting cultivation, government was not getting anything. How will they calculate taxes? Because they are not getting anything from it. So finally, these people who were doing shifting cultivation, they were forcibly displaced from their homes in the forest. Some would change occupation, while some would start the rebellion, small or large. So who could hunt in these forest laws? Before the forest laws, many people who lived in forests, they would hunt deer, partridges, and very small animals. And but because this forest law has prohibited this, if they are caught hunting, they would now be punished for poking. Because of the customary rights of the local people, they were deprived of hunting. Now this hunting will become a sport for other people, like for the colonial people and the administration. Hunting of tigers and other big animals. If you see in our past, this is the culture of court and nobility. So many Mughal paintings, if you see, you see princes and emperors they are with these killed big animals. But under the colonial rule, the scale enhanced, exponentially, in such a way that some of the species almost became extinct. So what this British understanding was that these large animals, these are sign of wild, primitive and savage society. So if they are killing dangerous animal, the British are actually making this country civilized. They also gave rewards for killing various animals. Over 80,000 tigers, 150,000 leopards and 200,000, that is 2 lakh bulls were killed just because the Britishers were giving reward in the period of just 50 years, 1875 to 1925. And then the tiger came to be seen as a sporting trophy. These are certain picture. This is the picture. If you see how many tigers are there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 tigers. So this is how the killing was done. I'll give you some names, like the Maharaja of Sarguja. He shot 1,157 tigers and 2,000 leopards up to 1957. There was a British administrator called as George Yule. He killed 400 tigers. So this is how the things went up at that time, killing of the you can say wild animals, big animals. They think that they are making Indians civilized. So after that, new trade, new employments and new services came. How? Because the natives, they lost out various jobs they were doing. Their occupation for centuries, decades. Now the forest department is controlling the forest. Some were benefit, but some were not. But there were opportunities for other trades also. Many communities left their traditional work or occupation and they started trading in forest products. But this happened everywhere. If you see in Brazil, because of the growing demand of rubber in the mid 19th century, in Munduruku, these people of Brazilian Amazon who lived in villages on high ground, they were cultivating manure. They began to collect latex from wild rubber trees for supplying it to traders, and then they came down, that is descended, to live in trading post, and finally they completely were dependent on these traders. In India also, this trading is not new. If you see the Adivasi, they would bring hides, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, spices, fibers, grasses, guns, resins. You get it from nomadic communities like the Banjaras. But the British, they were completely regulating everything. So they gave some European trading firms the sole right, that is the complete right to trade in the forest product of particular areas. After that, the grazing and hunting by local people was completely restricted. If this process was going on, and many pastoralist and nomadic communities like the Korawa, Karacha and Yerukula of Madras Presidency, they just lost their occupation, livelihood. So some of them were began to be called by Britishers as criminal tribes. And they were forced, because they were criminal tribes, they were forced to work in factories, mines, plantation under the government supervision. So the condition didn't improve that much. In Assam, both men and women from forest communities like the Santhals, Orans from Jharkhand and Gonds from Chhattisgarh, they were recruited for this plantation. The conditions were not good and they could not return to home easily once they are recruited. And colonialism. So there were so many things going on in the colonial rule. So there were Forest Act being imposed and things were regulated by the authorities. Then the
if something is done against the will of the people or against their livelihood, some rebellion will always be there. In many parts of India and also across the globe, forest communities rebelled against the changes that were imposed on them. We know about Sidhu and Kanu in Santhal Paraganas, Birsa Munda of Chota Nagpur, and Alluri Sitaram Raju of Andhra Pradesh. They are still remembered. Why? Because they stood against all these things which were happening, especially for the forest where they belong. So we'll just talk about one rebellion which took place in the kingdom of Bastar in 1910. So this is the rounded area or the circled area, which is the actual area where the things happened. And if you see, the geography is like this. This was Madhya Pradesh area, and now this is coming in Bastar, and Kanker all are coming in the Chhattisgarh area. And this is the border area where a lot of forests were there. So Bastar is located in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh and it has borders with Andhra Pradesh, Odisha and Maharashtra. Now the central part of Bastar is on a plateau. North of this plateau is the Chhattisgarh plain and the south is Godavari plain. The river Indravati winds across Bastar east to west. Various communities, they live in Bastar like Maria Gonds, Durwas, these Bhatras and Halbas. And they often speak different languages, but they have almost similar custom and beliefs. So this is a picture of army camp in Bastar, and this was taken in 1910. And the army moved with tents, cooks and soldier. And here you see a sepoy which is guarding camp against the rebels, which we are just talking right now. So as we said, this Bastar in 2000, in 1947, there was a Bastar kingdom and it was merged with the Kanker kingdom, and then it became Bastar district in Madhya Pradesh. In 1998, it was divided in 3 districts. 1947, they combined Kanker and Bastar. In 1998, they were divided into Kanker, Bastar and Dantewada. In 2001, this became a part of Chhattisgarh. So in 1910, as we are talking about, rebellion first started in the Kanker forest area. Why? Because the first thing happened here. We'll just talk about that. Now the basic thing is, you are still in news, you might be hearing about the Maowadi attack, etc. And this all started from here only. And that is why we hear so many news about this. So the people of Bastar, that they believe, and every the tribes, they consider that village was given its land by the earth, and in this way they look after the earth by making such certain offerings at each agriculture festival, and they respect the rivers, forest and mountain as spirits, and they all have boundaries, and they have certain natural resources within their boundary. If some other village or some other village wants to enter that boundary and want something, then they have to pay a small fee that was called as Devsari, Dand or Man. And most of them, they engage in watching, and you can say they're just paid through grain by different village people. And there is every year one big hunt where the headmen of the village in the Pargana, that is the cluster of certain villages, meet and they discuss issues regarding their area, including the forest. Now, what was the fear of the people? When the colonial government, they proposed to reserve 2/3 of the forest in 1905, they wanted to stop the cultivation, hunting and collection of forest produce. What will the people who belong to forest will do? Bastar people are the same, they got worried. And some villages were still allowed to stay in the reserve forest, but the condition was they need to work for free to the department in cutting and transporting trees and also protecting the forest from the fires. Then these villages were known as forest villages, and people were just displaced, no compensation, no notice. All these rents and frequent demands of free labor and all these things were happening, and this was adding to the suffering of the people. And then the final thing happened, terrible famine in 1899 to 1900, and again in 1907 and 1908. And this all created the background of the rebellion. So reservation, that started everything. Reservations of that is reserving the forest. This was the last thing which started everything. Now people began to gather, and they started to talk about this. And the initiative was taken by whom? The Dhurwas of Kanker forest. Why? But because the reservation law was first imposed there. This was the first place. They don't have any single leader, but village Nethanar, there was Gunda Dhur. He was considered as an important figure of this movement. So in 1910, mango, boughs, lump of earth, chilies and arrows, and they all began circulating within these villages. And messages also started flowing, and every village contributed. Bazaars were looted, the house of officials and traders, schools, police station, they were burned and robbed, and grain were redistributed. And those who were attacked, they either are from colonial state or they were connected to some oppressive laws. William Ward was the missionary here, and he saw the event, and he wrote from all the directions came streaming into Jagdalpur, police, merchant, forest peons, the schoolmasters and the immigrants. So the British, they did what? Because the rebellion was, you can say uprising was there. So British sent troops, and the Adivasis leaders still wanted to negotiate or try to have a conversation with them. But British didn't do that. They just surrounded their camp and fired. And after that, they marched through the village and punishing those who were part of rebellion or they were connected to some rebellion. So most of the villagers, what they would do, they have to go to the jungles. They have to run to the jungles. So it took 3 months from February to May for the British to regain control of all these. But they didn't manage to capture Gunda Dhur. But it was a major victory for rebel. This was symbolic because the Reservation Act or law was temporarily suspended. Right? It was suspended. And the area also, which was 2/3 previously proposed, this was reduced to half. That was planned before. Now, if you see the story of this forest and people of Basad, this doesn't end here. These things happened again and again. In 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of natural sal forest, they should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. But this didn't go well. Means the project was to be stopped because people came against this. So we need to understand that this was not happening in India only, that is Asia. There are certain parts where colonies were there. So we'll just take an example of Indonesia. Why? Because the things are similar which were happening. So forest transformation in Java, first of all, let us know what Java is. And let me show you the picture so that we understand it better. Now this is the area of Java. This is Java. And these are the island country which is our Indonesia. So most of the Indonesia's forests were located in island like the Sumatra, the Kalimantan and West Irian. But Java is where the Dutch began their scientific forestry, as British did in India. Now this place actually now is very famous for its rice production, but at that time, once upon a time, it was richly covered with the teak and it was all being cut. So now you have a certain idea about what area we are talking about. So Java is now, as I said, rich producing land or island in Indonesia, but it was covered by a forest once upon a time. So the power of Indonesia, the colonies, were with Dutch, Holland or Netherlands people. And there were so many similarity in the laws of forest control in India and Indonesia. That is why we are discussing it. Java in Indonesia is the place where Dutch started the forest management. And they also wanted the timber to build ship. So in 1600, the population of Java was estimated to be 3.5 million. They have fertile land, but there were so many communities living in the mountains and practicing the shifting cultivation. So there were special people and very regarded people who were the woodcutters. So the Kalangs of Java, this was a community of skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. They were so valuable. I can give you an example that in 1755, when the Mataram kingdom of Java split into two parts, 6,000 Kalang, that is these woodcutters families, were equally divided between these two kingdoms. And without their expertise, the kings even can't build their palaces. So when the Dutch came into being, that is they started gaining control over the forest in 18th century, they wanted the same thing. They wanted these Kalangs to work for them. And in 1770, the Kalang resisted and they attacked Dutch fort at Juana. But this uprising was short-lived. It was being suppressed. So what was the Dutch scientific forestry? In 19th century, see, this is showing all the what we are discussing, this small picture. These are the trains transporting this teak out of the forest. This is late colonial period. So in 19th century, when it became very important to control the territory, not just the people, Dutch enacted forest law, as British did in India, in Java. They started in Java restricting villages access to forest. Now wood can only be cut for very specific purposes like making river boats or constructing houses, and under very close supervision. And if someone is found, that is villagers are found grazing cattle or transporting wood without permit or traveling on forest road with horse carts or cattle, they will be punished. As we saw in India, the need to manage forest for this shipbuilding and railway, this led to a lot of things like introduction of forest services. So in 1882, 280,000 sleepers were exported from Java alone, right? And all this required what? Labor in order to make logs and sleepers. So the Dutch first imposed rents on the land being cultivated in the forest, and then they also exempted certain villages. Why? On the one condition that they would provide free labor and buffaloes for transporting timber, and this was known as Blandongdiensten. Okay, this is a very difficult word, so still need to remember. So later, with the rent exception, they started giving some money also. So there was a person called Samin. So they have to face the Samin challenge. The Dutch has to face the Samin challenge. Around 1890, Sorontiko Samin, he was from Randublatung village, a teak forest village. He started questioning the ownership of the forest. He said that everything is created by the Almighty, the wind, water, earth, wood. So nobody could own it. Everyone is belong to everyone. So this movement spread, and it was supported by, and main key feature was Samin's son-in-law also. By 1907, 3,000 families were influenced by his idea. So some of the Saminists, they protested, they just laid down when Dutch came to survey. Others refused to pay taxes or fines, or they said, we will not perform the labor. So war and deforestation. This is the Indian munitions board, war timber sleepers piled at Sule Pagoda ready for the shipment. And this was happening because of the war. So war, how does war affected the forest, and why deforestation actually increased exponentially? The First and the Second World War had major impact on the forest. In India, the working plants were abandoned for that time, and the tree were cut to meet the British war needs. In Java, what happened? Because we are just trying to find the similarity also. Dutch were there, but the Japanese were occupying the region. They were about to occupy the region. So Dutch followed a very different policy, a scorched earth. That is, before leaving, they destroyed sawmills, burned huge piles of giant teak logs so that they don't come into the possession of Japanese. But Japanese, when they come, they also exploited recklessly for their war needs. They cut down forests, everything they did. And this is what happened at that time. So new developments in forest, since we see that we have a picture here again showing the long yard in Rembang under Dutch colonial rule. So since the 1980s, government across Asia and Africa, they began to see the scientist based or scientific forestry and policy of just keeping the forest communities, those belong to the forest, away from the forest. These were the main key aspects or reason for conflicts. So conservation of forest rather than collecting just the timber has become the important goal. Now the government, most of the government, they have recognized that the people who live nearby, they need to be involved. So in many cases, if you see across India from Mizoram to Kerala, we have dense forest. These are protected just because certain you can say communities like Sarnas, Devara Kudu, Kanrai, they think them as a sacred place. Okay, villagers also started patrolling, and everyone like villages or villagers, they started guarding. And this is how local forest communities and environmentalists today, they are thinking of different forms of forest management, not what colonial rule people did. So this is all about the discussion of this topic. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.